Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. The South Carolina Ports Authority, a major economic driver in South Carolina, supporting 187,000 jobs and nearly $53 billion in annual economic activity. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
An interesting statistic right now related to just the stock market is that if these current market levels hold or go a little bit higher, then in August of this year, we will have experienced the longest bull market in official recorded contemporary stock market history. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business, policy, and public affairs, seen every week in the Carolinas. And what is historic about this bull market expansion really represents is a proxy for our economy, our communities, our businesses, and indeed our lifestyles. We will analyze these issues worth discussing right here in our region. And later, we're glad to host again the North Carolina Ports Authority boss, Paul Cozza.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Allen Smith from the Spartanburg Area Chamber of Commerce, Jonathan Kappler of the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, and special guest Paul Cozza, CEO of the North Carolina State Ports Authority.
Hello, welcome to our program. Sorry, all the good conversation usually happens right before the show, and we hope to bring it onto it. Jonathan, welcome back.
Thank you.
Alan, welcome. Good to have you guys both here. You know, one of the dialogues that goes on, because this economy's been so great, has been the, Alan, I'm not sure how you put it right before the program, but the average person can't afford the average rent anymore in some markets like Charlotte, Raleigh, Greenville, Spartanburg, Asheville, Charleston, the list goes on and on. Is this a crisis, Jonathan? Do you think it's a crisis?
I think it's a slow boil to that point, and we're seeing it bubble up at the municipal level. In Raleigh, it was actually the key issue in a lot of the local elections recently in Raleigh and other areas of the Triangle specifically, which is where I live, and so that's what I'm most familiar with. And I think you're going to see it kind of the profile raised to state and federal levels, because that housing issue is so foundational to a lot of other economic development issues. And if people can't afford to live in these communities, it's going to make it harder and harder for us to be able to attract and kind of sustain a long-term economic growth.
Is it the same dialogue you're hearing, Alan?
Yeah, and I think we've been fortunate. We've been incredibly proactive, and I think you have to be creative in this kind of market. I mean, we all know the number one issue in the business community is talent. We've got to have talent in order to continue to grow. And one thing that we've been able to do in Spartanburg is take a look at some of the parts of our community that have been ignored and maybe looked over, and look to them for revitalization, look to them for workforce housing, affordability, because the fact of the matter is, if we ignore this issue, we will not be able to recruit talent.
So do you intentionally push, let's use developers as an example of that. Now, let me stay with you for 1 second. Alan, in downtown Spartanburg, do you need to push developers to say, well, you need to look at the east side, or you need to go over the tracks, quote unquote, and say, let's figure out a neighborhood that we can, I don't want to use the term gentrify, but redevelop? Or do developers and the money go where developers and money can make money?
We always try to steer and guide, but these are pro forma based decisions. We've been incredibly fortunate. Our former mayor, Bill Barnett, is leading a North Side development group, and this is an entity that is doing some of that revitalization of a part of our city that has been ignored for a long time, getting very creative on financing, making it attractive for the private sector to invest in a part of the community that, as I said before, that has been ignored. And so it's been a big win for us too. It's also been a talent play, because we're able to say to folks, hey, look, this is a community where we really care about the least of these, and we're doing some things to move our entire community forward, not just a select few. So we are trying to get ahead of the gentrification, the housing issue as best we can.
Does Raleigh have, I mean, is there a dialogue going on in the Triangle about how to attack this?
There is, and some creative solutions potentially. There's been a lot of conversation around this concept around the granny flats, like a secondary structure on someone's property and whether or not that's allowed. And that is a kind of creative private sector approach almost to kind of providing additional housing within the kind of current housing stock context. But there are other ways. You really got to approach this in a broad-based way to create the incentives for the developers and home builders to provide a wide variety of housing, right? I know there's a lot of incentives to kind of build the luxury end of the market, and we're seeing a lot of that, and it can be a real challenge for folks as we're getting, a lot of the talent coming out of the colleges and universities. They can't, immediately afford, many thousands of dollars worth of rent.
So are there similar spirits of cooperation in places like, and since you live in Raleigh, Wake and Orange counties? Or do they approach these, Durham County, do they approach them differently?
Yeah, I think you're going to have more of a regional approach than we currently do, and there are so many different kind of personalities within the communities, right? And so, especially in a metropolitan area like North Carolina frequently has, where folks really are kind of crossing a lot of county borders, you're going to have a more regional approach to this, and I don't know if we currently really do yet, which is why I think the state level needs to get kind of more involved in the conversation.
Speaking of growth, one of the things where it's very apparent is, and we're going to find out from the port, but in the airports, Greenville, Spartanburg, Charleston, Charlotte, RDU, Asheville, Wilmington, so on and so forth, all are posting some pretty record numbers of enplaning, deplaning, cargo going through. It's a good problem to have, right, Jonathan?
Yeah, absolutely.
But is it a challenge?
Yeah, I think so. And it's another infrastructure issue, a different kind, and one that is maybe not as apparent as others, the roads that everybody drives on every day. And I think people underestimate the real value that airports play in the economy. We all know that the Charlotte Douglas International Airport is a huge economic driver for the Charlotte region across both Carolinas. Right. But increasingly, especially as North Carolina's population, even though it's relatively concentrated in Charlotte, Raleigh area, but they only have about 20%, those two counties, Wake and Mecklenburg, 20% of the state's population. So we have a lot of smaller and regional airports that are very important to those local economies that are much closer to where people actually live, that are seeing growth and should see additional investment. We've seen some of that coming from the state. We may need to see more.
Is there a way to kind of bump along the growth at Greenville, Spartanburg, or Columbia, or wherever, Allen, that can be beneficial to the community that it sits in?
Well, Greenville-Spartanburg International Airport clearly understands that. In fact, they've just finished a $120 million terminal renovation, and they have a lot of land. They've been sitting on a lot of land for a long time. They're now moving, and they have a land use plan. So they're going to be getting in the development space. Another thing that's key for our region is manufacturing, distribution, and logistics. Greenville-Spartanburg International Airport is getting more and more involved in the freight game. And I know we're going to talk about the port, but basically the Greenville-Spartanburg International Airport site is contiguous to Spartanburg County's inland port. So you have major modes of distribution side by side, not to mention I-85 and I-26. So Greenville-Spartanburg has gotten very, very cognizant of that opportunity, and I would probably say over the past decade has moved quickly to take advantage of it.
You know what I've noticed in the last few months, and maybe even the last year, that Spartanburg has been posting some pretty impressive gains in growth, in development. And there's always been, Allen, and I say this just because I watched it for about 3 decades, and that's this competitive, we're not Greenville, we're not Spartanburg, however, we are in the same ADI. But Spartanburg has been posting some pretty impressive growth numbers, more so than anywhere else in the state almost. That obviously has been by design to some degree, but are we right to think that Spartanburg is now growing at a pretty healthy clip?
That's probably the biggest softball you will throw to me during this entire interview.
When I thought about it when it was coming out of my mouth.
No, and so thank you for the opportunity. Past 5 years, $4.5 billion in investment in Spartanburg County, which is nearly a quarter of every dollar that's invested in the state of South Carolina. Last year, $1.2 billion was invested in Greenville, Spartanburg counties. $885 million of that was Spartanburg County-based projects. We just had a big announcement, Coreg Green Mountain Coffee, $350 million investment, 500 new jobs will be coming to Spartanburg County for their roasting, manufacturing, and packaging facility. And we have we're projecting 8 to 12 million square foot of spec space that's going to come online in the next 8 to 10 years.
Yeah. Wow.
So yes, in a lot of ways, it's not, are we emerging, are we on the cusp? No, we're leading in the state of South Carolina in terms of investment and new job creation.
Well, congratulations to you and other city leaders for spending that. You know, we've been talking about the port, so let's just not talk about it. Let's get the guy out there. And let's talk about it. Next week on this program. Tim Arnold is the Chief Executive Officer of Colonial Life, headquartered in Columbia. Tim has been on this program before. Tim is coming back to talk about not just the growth in the life insurance and the insurance market in general, but what is going on in the Midlands of South Carolina. And then also Governor Roy Cooper back on this program in a couple weeks to talk about all things Tar Heel State. With literally hundreds of miles of coastline, the Carolinas enjoy more water access than most other coastal states, let alone those that are landlocked. It's hard to imagine this region that we call the Carolinas without the coast. And there are not many more important aspects of ocean access than the port. The economic implications alone are massive. Joining us again is the Chief Executive Officer of the North Carolina State Ports Authority, Paul Cozza. Paul, welcome to the program.
Hey, Chris, good to be with you again.
You know, we're talking about all this stuff, all this growth, Paul, and you look at the number of containers that have come through Wilmington, Moorhead, the North Carolina ports in general in the last 6 months, in the last 12 months, the last couple of years. It's pretty astounding as well. You know, these are all good problems to have. How would you characterize the growth in the port, and where do you see the biggest challenges to manage this going forward in the near term?
No, two things. Here's a good statistic for you. So far this year for the Port of Wilmington, year to date, we've seen an increase in our containers of 60% year over year, which has been phenomenal. Wall Street Journal reported a couple of days ago that on the East Coast ports, the average has been about 9.7%. So clearly we're growing at a rapid pace. We haven't been growing at that full pace. The last 4 years, the average growth rate's been about a little bit less than 10%. But still, like you said, a lot of growth that's happening. What's the cause of this? What are the things that's really is making it happen? There's a lot of factors. One is it's a market that has been underserved. We spoke about this a few years back, and I think what we're seeing is we're seeing the logistics change over to the right routes, and the routes being through the port. So that's one. Other things happen is we're making a great investment. The state's been investing quite a bit in its port resources. With that, our capabilities have increased, so we're seeing a cargo shift there.
Is that deepening of the harbor, that kind of capability?
It is. Actually, it's great. The first thing that we did with some of this investment was deepen on the basis that we're able to have larger ships coming in. So as we all know, Panama Canal has expanded the last couple of years. With that, as trade's increasing, larger container vessels are coming to the East Coast, so we're able to keep up with that. This past weekend, actually, we were able to have the largest vessel we've seen that come to the Port of Wilmington, which is more than twice the size of what we were seeing 3 or 4 years ago. That translates to more cargo, but it also translates to just changes in the supply chain, international supply chain. Again, seeing that the cargo is routing over the areas where it's most efficient, where it makes sense.
So not just getting it on dry land, but getting it inland.
Very important. As we say, nothing starts or stops at our port. We are a conduit to that whole supply chain. So what's important also is not only the activities we're doing at the port, but what's happening on the roads and rail, where there continues to be investment there. Something that we did about a year ago is we started what's called intermodal rail service again. That's essentially when you take a container from a truck to rail back to truck again. Where we're doing that is direct service coming into Charlotte, using it as an inland terminal. Something's very important, very specific. What we're hearing from customers saying, this is something that we need to see happen. Gives a different avenue other than the truck route. It's more efficient, more environmentally friendly, and it also helps a lot of the importers, exporters in the area from the basis of their international transportation. And ultimately what we want to do, which is so important, is it's not just we always say it's not to push cargo through the port. Our job is to improve the economy, enhance the economy, be an engine. And those are the things that we're really pushing for, to see those businesses grow in the Carolinas.
Jonathan?
Yeah, so infrastructure, transportation policy, those kinds of things are frequently one of the last bastions of area where the two political parties can really find some common ground. And I'm curious as to, I think that's both nationally and in North Carolina. It's a good starting point for folks. We know we need investment there to continue to grow. And so I'm curious to the reception that you've received in Raleigh and Washington for investment and improvements that will continue to move us forward in the North Carolina ports. And also, what are some of those policy changes that might be needed to make us even more competitive?
It's very openly is traditionally for North Carolina, there was not a huge investment in its ports. However, we've had a lot of success in the last 4 years, and we've gotten great support from our government in Raleigh. Our General Assembly has appropriated, at first it was $35 million a year, now we're at $45 million a year. That's giving us this advantage to be able to invest over $200 million in infrastructure. So we've seen a great commonality happen out of Raleigh, which we were very, very happy to see. And at the same time, we're able to put it into an area where we're getting results. One of the things we talk about very much for North Carolina ports is to run it like a business. We talk in business terms when we're discussing things with the General Assembly. Plus, we also, though, put some high expectations that we were able to get the results. We're showing the results that we've talked about and above and beyond, and that's important so that we think it makes sense to make those investments.
And are you getting support from beyond the immediate scope of where the ports actually are, from legislators and others from other parts of the state?
No, we really are. It's interesting. We have legislators on the western part of the state very concerned about the ports, which we haven't seen traditionally. But they understand that, again, the business isn't just on the coast. The business extends well inland. And we make a decision, I always say, is we make a decision on our road structure, our rail structure, on the western part of the state, it affects the eastern part of the state. We're making a decision on the northern part, it's all part. It's part of a supply chain that's so important in all of the Carolinas that we want to see it continue.
Wonderful.
Alan?
I think both states have done a really good job of making people understand in the central and western parts of the state that indeed jobs are tied to our ports. They're incredibly important. What I wanted to ask you is, we have the largest exporter of cars in Spartanburg County, BMW. You mentioned the increased capacity. Jim Newsom would probably tell you the same numbers for South Carolina Ports Authority. How do you keep up with and plan for that kind of growth?
You have to, what happens is when you make transportation decisions, you all see this all the time, you're not talking 2 years out, you're not talking 5 years out, you're talking 20, 25 years out. So one of the things we really spend a lot of time on North Carolina ports is productivity and speed. It's known we're not the largest port compared to some of the ones around us. So what we want to do is what we say is be better than others on the basis of productivity. So we spend a lot of time on how fast we can get ships in and out. We spend a lot of time on the basis of what, from a trucking perspective, all of terminal operations, those types of things, because speed, as you know, is so important. Being able to get that product through so it gets to the western part of the state is so important. Again, congestion is becoming such an issue, especially in the southeastern area, part of the country, and we want to make sure that we're ahead of it. And you have to think 25, 30 years out, because when you're making business decisions now, sometimes it takes a few years to get them in place, plus also to make those changes, it's going to take more time. So thinking forward, staying ahead of the curve, and being able to offer really a seamless service, I think, is for the future.
Paul, so you've got a $200 million infrastructure investment either planned or going on now.
Correct.
I'm assuming that is going to, how does that help you on the side from getting the product in and moving it out? How critical is it to deploy that $200 million and to get those lanes open and to get that plan deployed?
Extremely critical from the basis of, first, the plan part of it. You have to look again forward and say, not what do we need now, what do we think we're going to need in 10 years? If we're growing at a 60% clip and that continues, is you have to think, okay, so we don't have congestion.
And sorry, let me ask you one quick thing.
Yeah.
And do you run up against a lot of headwind from neighbors, or not just around the port, but on those spurs that come into the port? Do you have to plan for some of the static that you're going to get about not my neighborhood?
Where you have to look at as a plan is to think of, we're part of a community. So you have to think in terms of how do we affect the community around us. But we've been really fortunate that we're getting a lot of support. There's a real, if you look in the Wilmington, the southeast area, there's a lot of support for the port, a lot of support for international transportation. So we work with community leaders, we work with governmental leaders, we work with on the engineering side, all of that to keep it. So we've been really fortunate there, and that's just keep it going. And then also on the state basis, we do the same things. What we'd like to do is talk about about the benefits, talk about the reasons why we think it makes sense, but also to listen to people, understand their concerns, so you can try to do things hand in hand. We find very openly, it's just good conversation, being open, being very transparent really goes a long way. And to listen, sometimes there's a lot of good ideas and say, you know, we don't need to do it this way, maybe we can do it other way. Find some solutions to different types of problems. Because as you grow, there are challenges, there's no question about it. But on the other side of it, as long as you can stay ahead of this curve that we keep talking about, it makes it really worthwhile.
Jonathan?
Yeah, you've got a lot of positive momentum, but I'm always curious about what keeps you up at night, right? What are the challenges on the horizons that you're worried about? I know the long-range planning has probably a whole host of things associated with it that are difficult to navigate, but I'm just curious as to what your kind of tops your list.
Yeah, no, it's definitely is keeping the support within the state. I always talk about that it's a team. It's amazing, say that when the state's resources all come together, and this is everything from General Assembly to parts of the whole governmental staff to regionally, we can really do a lot of great things. Very honestly, when I came in 4 years ago, there were a lot of naysayers. There were a lot of people saying things that we can't do. And what I'd like to talk about more, what are the things that we can do? What are the possibilities we do? So what does keep up is that we can keep that momentum going. That's really what I'm after. There's always going to be bumps in the road. We know it's part, especially if you see it every day as you deal with governmental agencies. But at the same time, if we keep that the momentum going, and also we keep a plan, I think that's the main thing. If you keep a plan that's in reach and things where you want to go. But above all, if you talk about things you're going to do, you have to come through with them. And that's fair. And we're ready for those type of things too.
Mr. Smith?
You know, it's interesting, American consumers, how they've changed their habits. I mean, who would have thought that we could log into a site at 2 a.m. in the morning and have something arrive the next day? And so distribution and logistics has changed so much and continues to do that. And you're really at the tip of the spear. I mean, what do you see in terms of trends?
It's we all talk about it, the Amazon factor, and there's no question. We're all used to it. We're so used to using our smartphones, using a tablet, ordering something online, and expecting it now in a day or two. It really is tremendous. And with that, then, that has really turned over the whole basis as what is international transportation logistics. I think what's important is critical is, again, this speed we keep talking about, keeping things very fluid. The other part, too, is having alternatives, having a basis that it's not just one lane or one different way of doing it, that there's other alternatives, because you have nature, you have breakdowns associated with just other infrastructure type things or just other areas that come up. Got to stay nimble. Information is so important. Information has to be at fingertips. And then the other part of it, too, is just being able to offer a qualified service that people see in consistency on.
So at the ports, do you have a war room now that focuses just on trade, possible trade talk and dispute? Is that something that upends your business model?
A great thing is happening now as you look at all these things with talk in the nation about tariffs in different areas that's coming up. You know, when we talk with especially importers now and say, how does this affect you? What are the things you're saying? Is what they're seeing, their biggest challenge is it's changing. How can they look at their business? What's going to change day to day? And we do talk about it. I don't know if it's in a war room, but it's in maybe a coffee room that we do it, and saying, how can we stay ahead? What's happening next? What are you hearing? Above all, what we want, too, is that when we hear from our importers and exporters, how can we help you? What are the challenges you're all having? And it's amazing. It's a variety of different things that you have. If you're talking to a retailer that's maybe bringing in textiles, it's one bit of challenge. If you talk to somebody bringing in heavy manufacturing, it's another bit. Talk about somebody bringing raw materials, if it's aluminum or other things, how are tariffs going to affect me? How are changes there? What we want, especially for our business in Carolinas, is try to keep them that not only are they nimble, but they're successful. Ultimately, if they're able to import, export as they need, they can grow their business. They have the efficiencies, the cost factors. They're going to hire more people. At the end, that's what we really want.
Are you worried at all, not to politicize it, Paul, are you worried at all that the trade talk, trade disputes will slow down, will slow the business down?
It's I've been 30 years of doing this, Chris, and it's been international of transportation logistics. I'm a free trader. I like to let things flow how they need to flow. There are factors like currency. There's different factors like just of different things that happen from infrastructure, other shifts in global supply chain. I think it'll all play out. It typically does. The global transportation network is so efficient and continues to get efficient. I'm more of an optimist. I think things will play out over time the way we want them to.
We have less than a minute left, so let me just follow up with a quick question. DOT Secretary Jim Trogdon was on the program talking about the priorities around DOT and transportation in North Carolina in general. He did mention the ports and how important the ports are. Do you feel like you have and I want to call it a friend because I know he's very thoughtful and he believes in the ports. Does DOT give you the coverage you need to do what you need to do? Yeah,
definitely. As an example, we were on the phone yesterday talking about long-term rail in a lot of ways. So again, what we spoke about earlier, we could have the best port, we could have the best productivity, but if we can't get products in and out off of our rail and road network, it's not going to happen. And we have great meetings and also a lot of planning on the basis. And we're talking longer term planning, which is so important. So really, we're really happy. I mean, the state support is there. It's changed so much in the 4 years that I've been around. Is it where we want it to be? Nope, it never is. We want it to keep moving forward. But keeping that fluidity is so important.
Come back more than a couple of years. Please come back soon. Good to have you here.
Love to be back. Thank you.
Alan, good to see you. Jonathan, good to see you.
Thank you.
Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, the South Carolina Ports Authority, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.